because I know that I'll need quite some time to introduce the next speaker. She's probably one of my favorite service designers. I've had the opportunity to meet her at least once in real life, or maybe twice. And when I was reading through her bio, I thought, well, we're going to need 15 minutes to go over this. She's a designer and a serial idea generator. She's been the guest on the Service Design Show episode number 42, so check that out. She's the Chief Design Officer at Northgate Public Services. She's the CEO of Snook, where she's on a mission to design a world where people and the planet thrive. She has an honorary doctorate from the Glasgow School of Arts. Some people might know her as Ruffle Muffin. It's Sarah Drummond, and Sarah is going to talk about is having a big design team equal to being a user and customer-centric organization, or is there more to it? So if you remember one thing from this conversation, this talk with by Sarah, it's going to be that we all have a conscious role to play in designing services, not just the customer experience team, not just the design team, everybody in the organization. So if you have questions for Sarah, make sure you keep them for the Q&A, because that's coming up after this. Now let's do a big round of virtual applause. You can use the applause emoticon in the chat, and let's welcome Sarah Drummond to the stage.
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm also known as Ruffle Muffin, if you want to follow me along on Twitter, a very embarrassing name. I'm just going to get us started on this presentation for the next 20 minutes. Let's just make sure we've got that up and running. I'll probably just look for a little thumbs up from Mark there that we're all good. Okay, great. Well, hello. It's morning still for me, but afternoon to everybody in the central time zone. I'm going to talk to you today about full stack service design, which is a kind of framework I've been, I guess, a culmination of my work over the last 15 years in service design, and talk a bit about why designers don't necessarily always equal good services or a user-centered organization. I'm also going to talk to you today about a concept called strategic imagination, and why galvanizing everybody around having a strategic imagination and the purpose of what you're trying to do is super important to deliver great stuff. So let's get that timer set and let's kick off. So I'm going to start off with a very short film for you.
I see you've only scored 12 points and you need 50 to obtain benefit.
Oh, points, that's your game.
I'm sorry, sir, but according to our healthcare professional, you've been deemed fit for work.
So she knows better than my doctor, a consultant surgeon and a physio team. Well, I want to appeal.
Well, that's fine, but you'll have to first request a mandatory reconsideration.
What the bloody hell does that mean?
It means the decision maker will reconsider it. If he comes to the same decision, you can then appeal.
Right, well, put us down for that then.
Okay, sir, but you must wait to get a call from the decision maker.
Why?
To tell you what his decision is.
But that's already been decided.
On the one hand, job seekers allowance, only for those able and ready to work. But if you're ill, you have to apply for employment and support, get an assessment carried out.
Well, I've done that, but they've knocked us back.
Right, well, if you've been deemed fit for work, your only option is job seekers allowance, or proceed with the appeal on employment and support.
Well, can you give me a form for, job seekers allowance and then an appeal form for employment and support?
You have to apply online, sir.
I can't do that.
Well, that's how it is, sir, or you can phone the helpline.
Listen, you give me a plot of land, I can build your house, but I've never been anywhere near a computer.
Do you know what? We're digital by default.
Oh, here we can. I hear this all the time on the phone, I'm digital by default. Well, I'm pencil by default. Look, I mean, what happens if you just can't do it?
There's a special number if you've been diagnosed as dyslexic.
Right, well, can you give us that? Because with computers, I'm dyslexic.
You'll find it online, sir. I must ask you to leave now, if you've got no appointment.
So that's a snapshot. Hopefully you could hear it. If you couldn't, the titles would take you through it. Of a film by the phenomenal director called Ken Loach. He released this film called I, Daniel Blake in, I think, 2016. And it charts the story of a man who has to give up work because he has a heart condition and start to claim benefits in the UK. And as the film goes on to show you, and I implore you to kind of go and watch it, it's a very, very sad story, showing that we've kind of accidentally and unconsciously designed complex and broken and hard to use services for people. And this is common across lots of different sectors. One of the most damning reads of one sector I've ever read was from the British Association of Social Workers and the Social Workers Union in the UK. And basically it was 200 pages of them moaning about how bad the job was, how they spent lots of the time using technology that didn't work for them and spending less time at the front line supporting the people who have critical needs. And I think what's really interesting about this is that I don't think one person woke up in the morning and thought, you know what, I'm going to design a terrible service or social care system. And that's because every organization, every system is a collection of lots and lots of micro design decisions that have been made on a daily basis that form the user experience that we're often asked to design. And I often split this sort of design into two modes in my head, which is conscious design and unconscious design. So conscious design is what most of us are probably here for, the active role that we have in making conscious design decisions that improve things or make things better in the world. You know, so a conscious design example might be if you've ever taken the bullet train in Japan and you go to get on it, there's a kind of gray box here that indicates that as a human behavior, I should stand in this area. That is a conscious design that's been made to change or challenge human behavior. But an unconscious design is stuff that often fails or is broken. And this is a photograph of my stepdad's buzzer system to get into his flat. And a very angry neighbor has actually corrected me for the last 10 years that I've been pressing number 11 and not number 8. It's not designed well. So it's not been tested. It's not been thought through. It's an unconscious form of design. An unconscious design, like we saw in the clip with Daniel Blake, costs us people and their lives. And we've created systems that don't really solve problems. They create more work, they cost us more to run and take us away ultimately from the critical job at the front line. And I think what's really interesting is that you can have the best design ops, the best tools, the best designers, as much money as you want in the world, but the user experience can still be terrible. And I remember actually going to see this film and standing at the end of it with a bunch of designers actually from Government Digital Service and other parts of the departments that had been working on gov.uk. And that design is almost flawless. The content's great, the UX is great, but it was a bunch of other design decisions that had been made before they even got to the point of making that design that creates a flawed system that's been unconsciously designed. So having lots of designers does not always equal user-centered organization or good services, because we all have the ability to make conscious design decisions that aid users, not just, as Mark said, in the design or customer experience team. So if our systems are to work, we have to learn how to consciously design together. Because services are made up of thousands of design decisions before we even get to the point of designing what we are often brought in to do as service designers or other design disciplines, the user experience. And so I often refer to this as full stack service design. It's a term that I use to try and think about all the other things that get made in terms of decisions before we get to work on what the actual user experience will look like. And I tend to think about it as above and below the waterline. So above is the service. What's that UX look like? What are the different touch points? What are some of the business processes that go into facilitating that? And sometimes we kind of get to play around with systems and technology. But a lot of Snook's work and my work over the last sort of decade has been involved in this much more less sexy, deep level of looking at the infrastructure, the organization and system, and the actual originating intent of why a service needs to even exist in the first place. And this covers lots of different elements, like the business model, the policy that sets out the service, even the ethics of the organization. They transform and they challenge what that service needs and should look like. So just to give you a couple of examples of how that manifests, we've done quite a bit of work with some major retailers on improving the satisfaction in the returns process. So that's the process when you might buy an item of clothing, you take it home, and ultimately that supermarket wants you to bring it back because it's more sustainable. They can recycle it or sell it again, but they can also get you back into the store to sell more things. And we did all the usual things like look at the end-to-end experience, try and improve the way the information was on the receipts that you got, to if you Googled how do I return my jumper to clothing store X. And we tried to improve all of that and it made a marginal difference. But the actual real problem was the policy that was set. And no one had really thought about this from a customer experience perspective. The policy to return stuff was actually 14 days. And so we changed it to 30 and got a 50% increase in people coming back into the store through our testing. So actually it was a policy that changed the service, not necessarily tinkering with the user experience. Just delving into policy a bit more deeply, it's a really interesting space for you to get familiar with and not feel scared of, as many of my design team often do, that it feels like this kind of amorphous thing that you can't control or be part of. But actually, when you're strategically designing, you're affecting policy at the same time. This is an example, which is a great example from the Scottish Government. We worked a little bit on the devolved benefit system that's now coming into Scotland, because in Scotland we get some different benefits from England. And it's to give money to people to support them with things like their disabilities. And the policy is really interesting when you actually start to look into it, because it starts to gently suggest what some of those design decisions need to be, like before coming to a face-to-face assessment. So we're still saying that there's face-to-face assessments, or what kind of supporting information might need to be included. Now, the Scott Government version, this is an excellent example, because they've actually kept it really wide open, and that's what good policy for designers looks like. But bad policy can sometimes even tell you the paperweight that you should be creating a manual on or delivering something through. So policy can really affect the services and what we're being briefed with to design. But like I said, the business model can, and I don't want to delve into the kind of old adage of how Blockbuster got trounced by Netflix, you know, and streaming took over. But what's really interesting about Blockbuster is that part of their business model was actually to ensure that people brought back their DVD or video late. In fact, over 10% of their annual revenue was made in late returning videos, which is about 800 million. So that's a significant amount of money for a service and a business. And so that kind of predicates that we should have stores on the high street, because it embellishes and continues that model. So the business model, in a sense, can also really kind of put its grip into what we should be designing as a service model and a product. And there's lots of other examples that I don't have time to go into today, but one day I promised Mark that I will write a book, so hopefully I can share some more on those. But I think what's really interesting is that when you start to work with organizations over a long period of time, which I have, because I have a number of roles as a trustee for some charities, you start to actually not just transform the user experience, but change the service stack of that organization. And I like to help organizations do that through testing and learning to make that strategy. So I'm going to talk to you about one case study today, and then just round off with a little bit about why strategic imagination in these kinds of approaches is really important. So I am a trustee of an organisation that was formerly called Action, and I'll come on to the new name in a second. But before I was a trustee, I worked with Snook to look at improving some of their mental health services. With You, Action was started in 1967 by a wonderful lady called Molly Craven to support her son who was addicted to heroin. We're an organisation that supports people with drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and the kind of wider sense of mental health that leads to those addictions as well. We have about 80 locations across the UK, and we reach about 130,000 people a year. And one of their services, which is called IAPT, which stands for Increasing Access to Psychological Therapies, it's basically a talking therapy, a form of kind of cognitive behavioural therapy, was really losing their clients between being referred by a key worker in a local authority or a GP, a doctor, and the first assessment. They were losing about 50% of people in that process. And because they're paid by results, we're a business as well as a charity, it's really important. So I'm not going to delve into exactly what we did, because I think many of you watching will be familiar with the approach to service design, but we did quite a lot of user research, spending time on site. We listened into calls, we attended some of the sessions, we spoke to a lot of different users who've been through the service, and some who haven't even managed to book an appointment. And we started to just help them actually understand what that end-to-end service looks like. And that was really important, because nobody had done that before from the point of view of the user. And what we found was a bunch of user needs that were not being met. So for example, in the sign-up stage, as a client, I need confirmation that my registration has been completed so that I can feel confident and assured. So we tried to figure out, like, how do we meet these? How do we reduce anxiety, clarify waiting times? And ultimately, because we looked at the data as well, we couldn't even answer enough calls to get people booked on, encourage online booking. So what we did is created hundreds of prototypes, lots of very micro prototypes, where we changed text and content on the website, the text message appointment reminders, we changed the timing of them, we implemented new booking systems, we changed the phone scripts, we did lots of stuff. And we did this in a period from start to finish over just a period of 2 weeks to show how quick it was to be able to do this. And after a couple of months and some of our interventions, we got very proudly 800 more people entering treatment each month, and a 30% increase in appointment booking. And in fact, NHS England pointed it out as a kind of best example of innovation and how to do this stuff quickly. But what was really exciting for me, and the most important thing, and a lot of the work that we do with Snook, is we train people and build the capabilities through the work. So Hannah here was the manager of one service at the time for IAPT, and she was blogging herself about how great this process had been and how she was taking it on board. And she then became the manager actually of all 4 services in the Southeast, and has now been promoted again to look after service design, essentially in the business of AdAction. So that was a kind of first start at us going, how do we test and learn what we do and improve our services from a user perspective? And it's a really great way for people to kind of understand what that looks like. But our strategy is really ambitious as an organization. We want to radically improve how people get better, but also help 10 times more people. And that's a lot more people. You can read all about the strategy on the link that will get sent out in the slides. It requires deep shifts in our organization. So the way we've been doing that is basically building our strategy and showing what the future could look like by testing and learning. We've been doing lots of different things. We've been redesigning the content on our website to try and make it more user-friendly so people understand what to do. We've been testing ways in which we can get out the life-saving naloxone, which is basically something that you inject if you have taken an opioid overdose. It saves lives. But it used to take us 45 minutes to get it into the hands of people. And that meant that our staff didn't have time to get it into people who were using drugs' hands. We got that down to about 5-6 minutes by changing the instructions and the design of the packaging. So now we're getting naloxone out to a heck of a lot more people, which is ultimately saving lives. We've been testing and asking ourselves the question of what does getting better even mean? Because again, coming back to the full stack, what you set out to actually do is really important to design your services around. And we didn't really have a unanimous agreement in what that actually means. And that means actually challenging some of the national measurement systems, which have made part of full stack as well, to say that maybe what the government measures isn't actually important for people. So the government measures if people are feeling better at the end of the process, and we check in with people doing a sort of 1 to 10 throughout. But often when we take people off drug and alcohol, they feel worse. So we don't really match up to the overall measurements of government. We've been working with lots of data scientists as well, just to understand how many people are coming to our services, at what times, what kind of channels they're using to access us. And that's been a really important step for us to kind of use in our designs when we're testing and learning. We've also been testing different ways to help staff spend more time at the front line by improving their tools and the kits that they have. And that includes redesigning and making it more accessible for people to take training so that they feel confident to deliver the services that they have. But we've also been looking at a very macro sense at starting recovery, and that's actually helping us to define what our products and services actually are. And just looking at that start of that journey and how it can be consistent across any touch point that you come to. But the biggest thing for us really was that our service users said that they had a lot of negative attitudes and language from the AdAction name. And that's because people felt that, you know, if we're trying to help 10 times more people, they didn't want to be associated with the stigma of maybe being a heroin addict or someone who's really addicted to alcohol. They might be someone that's maybe drinking a bottle, 2 bottles a night. They didn't feel that they had the same addiction as somebody else. And in fact, that's not true. All addiction is an illness. But we wanted to try and change the brand and name to achieve this. And that's because lots of people said that it counteracted how people felt they were treated in our service, which was warm, non-judgmental, motivating, supportive, person-centered. And other places had made them feel like a number, and at AdAction, it was about them. So there was something missing in our brand to really get this right. So we decided to rebrand. We did it pretty cheaply, actually, which is great. We went out and tested it with lots of different people who were actually involved in using the service, looked at wording, looked at coloring, looked at the messaging. And we rebranded as something that looks, hopefully for you on the screen, a lot better. We are with you. And people said it was much more warm, approachable, supportive, reassuring, and that people were 3 times more likely to get in touch with us. And our new name and everyday approach also reassured people that we were here for them in lots of different senses, not just in drugs or alcohol, but in work or just needing to talk to you. And people said they would actually go to it, which was just fantastic and what we were looking for. But the brand was really the MacGuffin for us to rethink about what it means to talk to us at the first point. So we changed our website. We actually created much more transactional material for people in terms of things like how to handle cravings or planning activities to keep your mind off your addictions. We also redesigned how to find services near us. But ultimately, a really cool thing that we did was we launched a chat service, which means that we can reach thousands of more people, if not hundreds of thousands of more, and help them in a much different way than having to visit our centres, which some people didn't feel comfortable to do. So we had a successful brand relaunch, which was amazing. But I think the reason I'm showing you this is what was really important about this work, and particularly rebrand on the back of lots of our testing and learning, is that it moved us from what we call a commissioner-based model, which is where we're paid by results in one local authority, into a blended, essentially business to customer model, where anybody in the UK, anybody probably abroad, can talk to us and get help. And that creates lots of really difficult strategic questions that we're now still testing and learning our way through, which is, how do we make money from that? It's a very different model. Who are our actual users now? What data do we need to collect? What does good look like? So we're trying to answer a way through all of those strategic questions. And change is hard. And I'm presenting this to you today in such a quick fashion, but this has taken 3 years and it's a long process, and people haven't always been fully behind it, because it calls for a shared strategic imagination. And if I talk about strategy for a second, this is a really wonderful quote from my friends at Rival, Ben and Marta. They often said that strategy is kind of these broad concepts that are often unrecognized but shared by large numbers of people. And they guide the strategic formulation and the direction that we're headed on. But as Umar Haque said, who's a fantastic thought leader, the surest, most lethal killer of strategic imagination is being reined in by orthodoxy, thinking that tomorrow must be like yesterday. And that's why it's really important to bring people on a journey with you and kind of figure out what I would call a new strategic imagination for your business or organization. You have to be aligned on that, because post-COVID, everything is going to change, as Peter Drucker said. We're going to need to rip up the rule book and start again. And that's really disarming for a lot of people who've been doing the same thing day in, day out for many years. So the imagination gap really is the biggest challenge to an aligned strategic vision. So just finishing off, the way that I really think about bringing people and building that imagination gap is making the strategy and bringing it to life. As designers, we're uniquely positioned to make stuff and build things. Mike Bracken's strategy for gov.uk was the strategy is delivery. But the reason he came up with that is because he interviewed a bunch of CEOs who had maybe not been as successful as they wanted to do in their post. And I asked them one simple question, which is, why did you not deliver things? And they said, we spent too long making strategies and not enough making. So you can build strategic imagination through making, because strategy starts before design, as you saw with the full stack. Lots of design decisions are made before that, but it continues with designing. And as designers and creatives and people who build prototypes, we make in order to deliver the strategy, but we need to take the strategic role of what we're making very seriously. So what we're doing it with you now is hand in hand with building the strategy. Even though we're making some leadership decisions, we're bringing people on the journey of change with us by getting them to think about what things for users might look like in 2 to 3 years, so that we can balance up that understanding of what innovation and change looks like in our organization. When I say technological innovation, people often think VR and AI, and really I'm talking about just getting data in order. So just aligning us on what we mean by our strategy. Because ultimately, 10% of our work as creatives and people working in service design is ideas, but 90% of design is bringing people on the journey to agree with you. And we can do that through open making. My final very, very fleeting example is a piece of work that we commenced this year. We've been working for many years on making sure that the internet is considered as a fourth utility to citizens, because it is incredibly and immensely valuable in driving equity in our society. And we've been writing and talking and doing lots of work about this. But in order to make that strategy and strategic imagination come to life, at the outset of the COVID crisis, we managed to get all the major telcos in the UK to make NHS and government data free for anybody in the UK to access information about the COVID-19 and the pandemic, which is the start of building that strategic imagination that you can, and it's possible to make the internet free for people when they need it. So just coming back to what Mark said at the start, sorry, I think we all have a role in consciously designing services beyond the design or customer experience team. But more designers does not necessarily equal better services and outcomes for people. Conscious design decisions at all levels, increasing literacy in good design, aligning strategic imagination of everybody in your organization or system, and an organization that tests and learns equals better services and outcomes for people. Did it 1 minute over, so thank you, SDN.
Round of a real remote applause. Thanks, Sarah. That was awesome.